welcome all of you. It's great to have this packed audience and a very senior list of people with us on the stage. We all know that things are pretty much stagnating around us, economy, and even in the political scene, things don't seem to be moving at the pace we would want them to move. So as we were thinking through of what we could get people started to talk on during these times when things are not moving, and central to which, of course, is our people. People want to be motivated. People want to come to work with a lot of energy and passion, and that is what companies would also want. We immediately thought of this subject, and what is it like, Mr. Murthy? IT is a sector which has a lot of young people, and you must be feeling these, the ups and downs, getting to people, the tough times, inflation, all of these. So it's not just a question of dealing with what a company is going through, but the environment outside. So, is it a fact that companies acknowledge that these are times when sentiment is low among employees for various reasons? Do you actually sit and talk about these things?
Yeah, most certainly. I mean, with employees being the most critical asset for us, conversations around employees happen every day, every time. The critical aspect from an employee perspective really is to look at it from where is the negativity coming from, right? And if you analyze that, it's partly a fear, the fear of the unknown, fear of not knowing will jobs grow the way they have been before. There's the element of trust, and then there is the element of misinformation sometimes, or certainly the lack of information, right? So I would look at it as give employees a sense of pride of association by celebrating success, help deepen the trust by simply saying what you do and do what you say, and communicate, communicate, and communicate. That's how I'll put it.
Okay, so you do agree that this is a periodic exercise that you take stock of. What is the morale like, or does you do it on a proactive basis, or you sort of sense that the mood is getting low, the morale is getting low? Typically, appraisals are the time when I'm sure you must all be feeling this. What do you say, Mayank? Is this does that tend to happen periodic?
One is we have formal ways to look at what the engagement morale levels are, but more than that, I think it's the pulsing by leaders, who travel across the country and meet people at different levels and try and gauge what is the level of morale and engagement in our people. And the moment we start seeing a trend where a part of the organization or a part of a business is in some ways demoralized or disengaged, we then start looking at the reasons, as Stan talked about, but also then start looking at how do we improve our engagement in those places. So I would say it's a continuous process than just a one-in-time kind of an activity.
Okay, yeah. So you're saying it's well knit into the process.
That's correct. Yeah.
Okay,
yeah.
okay. But what about you, Mr. Biswas? Do you sense that it's been particularly bad, or you work across geographies? So how is it, India versus some other market? And
okay, so I think let's talk about the overall economy. And from an economy standpoint, we understand it's a world economy, and specifically the IT industries, which are dependent on a couple of markets, are impacted by what they had seen in the past versus now. However, from where I stand, I'm still very positive about how things have worked out in so-called a slow growth era. Because what we have believed and practiced in Accenture is that this is the right time to refocus and build up for the new normal. So this is the time to build, whether it is in terms of building your skills for the new perspectives, whether it is in terms of newer technologies that will help you build for the future, whether it is about building HR skills that you always wanted to build as an HR practitioner. When things are going at a very hectic pace, that is the time where You would always think, oh, if I had the time, I would have wanted my HR professionals to be a little more there. What is happening is, I think with the new age industry, the velocity of change is what is surprising all of us. We've always lived in an era of change. Look at the manufacturing industry, the growth of the FMCGs, and then how it kind of stabilized. I think the velocity of change is what is surprising the IT industry, because that's the Indian, and coupled with that, the Indian IT industry and the outsourcing industry is pretty new, a couple of decades old. That's what is surprising. And of course, built with that is you have 3 generations of workforce today working in this industry at a similar time. So you have, so I think what you need to balance is how do you build a balance of building that skill that you needed for the future. How do you stabilize and get used to that this is the new normal? So a couple of things that we do at Accenture is, one, treating our employees as fully mature professionals and having a conversation which is straight. Telling them that, look, this is the new normal. This is what the business is looking forward. So we have seen that is something which is beneficial. People understand. They want to understand. No longer, I think it's a young workforce which needs to be engaged, and an extension of a college atmosphere that we need to create. Second is about, like I said, giving them opportunities to develop their skills and knowledge. That's a big thing for this knowledge worker in today's industry. The third is about participative management. We take pride in being a listening organization. Tan talked about. Mayank talked about listening to them as a continuum process, not only the engagement results which come out of the survey every year, but making a continuum effort to listen and make your employees participate in the organization building process. Besides, of course, the other things that you talked about. I think these are 3 critical criterias of doing the basic rights, which will help an engaging workforce.
Okay. What has been your experience, Shrikant? We were having a conversation before we came here, and it's interesting that you came up and you said that a lot has been happening within your organization, and I would love to know what is it and how have you been dealing with a huge workforce across, again, different centers, geographies. So,
last 13, 14 years, I've been lucky to work for an organization which has been transforming hugely. So I faced 2 kinds of changes. One is external changes, like huge economic slowdown or credit meltdown or whatever we have gone through in the last many years. That is external changes happening. And I also worked in an organization where a lot of internal struggle this organization is going through because of various bad things the leaders have done. As a result, these companies have been in the verge of bankruptcy. So I worked in a company called CA Technologies. I joined in 2001. And this company is about to close down. And all of you know that because of the bad things done by some of the leaders, and the company has gone through deferred prosecution agreement, and it's about to be closed. And I remember working with the Priya's organization, Stand & Chase. Even when I went for hiring people in the building organization in India, even leaders refused to come and join us. Even some of the big headhunting firms refused to work with us. They said, you have a bad reputation, and we can't hire leaders.
Absolutely,
it's a very bad situation we've gone through. Today, CA is one of the very solid product company with a very good, solid financial performance. Another example is Britannia. When I joined, the operating income was around 3.5% or 4%. Today, it's close to 8%. And another is where I work today, is CSC. CSC 18 months back, the stock was around $22, about to be declared bankruptcy. That's the time Mike Lowry, who's joined CSC, and today its stock is around $62. And Mike divide the transformation journey of CSC into 3 phases: get fit, grow, and lead. That means the organization need to get fit, then it has to grow and lead. So my lessons learned in these 3 organizations of CA Technologies, Britannia, and CSC is basically how do you manage change, how do you engage employees in huge transformation of whether it is transforming the culture of the organization. For example, CA Technologies have gone through 3 changes in the name itself. from computer associate to CA technologies. So we had a huge identity crisis. And cost cutting, when I joined 19,000 employees, today CA have only 11,000 employees. And in CSC, I don't declare the numbers, we have gone through huge cost saving. And there were 13 layers in the organization. Today we reduced into 8 layers. So employees' titles were changed, the costs were taken out. So to cut this story short, 2-3 things we did very well. One is our CEO believed in a concept called a straight talk. No point in beating around the bush, not pointing, telling lies to employees. You should be able to look at the employee's eyes and engage him on a straight talk. So every leader in the organization trained on how to have a straight talk with employees and explain to them the strategy of the organization, what it means get fit, what it means to grow, and what it means to lead. And explain to them the strategy of the organization in an elevator speech. How can you explain 2 to 3 pages to employees? And explain what are the desired behavior, what are the undesired behavior, and what is the transformation journey all about, and explain to employees. And we did a fantastic job. And tell them this is what it, and nobody in an international trip, we cannot travel in business class. It has to be economy. And we have put a lot of austerity measures in the last 18 months, and we know the pain of going through that. Today, if you look at the operating income of the company, the cash flow, the profitability, the customer intimacy, everything, we have come a long way. So the bottom line is, we call it a straight talk, and we developed a toolkit. And the engagement model, how do you engage people on a converse? We are in 75 countries. In India itself, we have 28,000 employees in 7 locations. 5 companies merged, like App Labs, Covansys. 5 companies. Integrating these 5 companies, which acquired over the last 4 years, is not an easy task. So one bottom line is leadership, culture, and within culture, how do you engage over a straight talk so that people appreciate and understand. And also, keep on updating people on town halls, communication, and how do you engage people on an organizational transformation. That business engagement is very, very important, not on benefits, compensation, that level of transactional engagement, and how do you overcome and engage them at the business level is very, very important.
Great. So you actually demonstrated that straight talk right now as we sort of, you've done some plain speaking. It's wonderful that, never take, and that's pretty much what you were talking about, that, people expect you to come out with it. It's a, maturing kind of an environment. Priya, you work on the other side, and he mentioned you. So I'm expecting you to actually tell me, what is it that you hear, and what is it that you really find often when you go and speak to leaders and, they discuss these issues with you. It's not only about finding the right talent, but also discussing many other attending things that would attract the right talent to the place. What is it that you've just heard our people here, and, I want the inside story.
Thanks, Shavni. From a search point of view, obviously things are very different. I apologize, I lost my voice for 2 weeks, so I'm just sort of getting back. But, you are looking at turbulent times very often from the other side. A reflection of these turbulent times is a lot more people out there, a lot more people engaging with a search firm because they're sort of de-risking themselves, and that's a good word to use in this context because people want to de-risk. So from a search perspective, when you look at the leadership angle and when you look at the sourcing or the leadership supply angle, it's very different. There has been a maturing of the space in the last 10 years. And I say 10 years because it seems like, a solid piece of time to relate to. Shami, I don't know whether you remember, we had a conversation many years ago about the response to a pink slip, right?
Absolutely.
And
how different cultures can, be when it comes to pink slip.
Yes.
Yeah.
Now, somewhere at the heart of this, so while I present a different perspective, what's also important is we also belong to the Indian, the geography, where I think where you go to is a large part of your identity. And therefore, I think Indian leaders, HR and business, are more sensitive, or if they're not, they've learned to be more sensitive about embracing this part of the Indian psyche, which is a large part of who I am, is where I work, or how I work. So the constant communication that Srikanth referred to, the town halls that Manoj was talking about, and the kind of engagement is critical, because what goes around comes around. People who have gone through difficult times with organizations and are still buoyant, respectful of them, are a great resource in the future. They speak very well of the organization. I'll give you an example. We worked with a company which was very large in the US, and I just started up in India. And it was tremendous, wonderful to get talent for this company because the brand, I beg your pardon, the brand was fantastic, but at the same time, the opportunities within the company were superb. Within a couple of years, because of global meltdown or whatever, the company had to, look at scaling back, in fact, almost close the operations in India. I can tell you it was very hard. From a search consultant who was passionately sort of presented the company and engaged with the whole mandate, to work on this was very, very tough. But the things that the company did as part of this was extraordinary. They engaged with people like us to ensure that we provided some measure of executive coaching in the transition, outplacement services. They talked openly about their severance packages and the kind of termination that was available. So people were in the know, and they were actionably in the know.
And psychologically had time to prepare for it.
Had time to prepare, and most of it was broken into small, items that could be executed pretty quickly. That, I think, helped. So, as I said, this is a perspective which is probably the underside of the top-level engagement, important HR and business tactics that are required. And I'm referring primarily to the turbulence that happens around tough economic times. Mm-hmm. And again, there's a lot of internalization of things going wrong. So if something were to happen and I would be part of the group that is being cut down, mm-hmm. it's a problem. I think that's changing. And therefore, that change is welcome because you're able to look at it a little more holistically. It's always about the individual. Despite the fact that we're dealing with groups of people, leaders, people that we are we're dealing with on a daily basis, some people that we've never seen sitting in a far-off location. It's always the individual. So that's one aspect. So from a search perspective, when you see this sudden surge or responsiveness saying something's happened and I therefore need to be a little bit more available in the market, that's changing. I think people are a lot more studied about the fact that change happens, much less hassled about how it affects them or how they perceive themselves. The second thing which I think is part of this journey is that you have the whole influx of the millennials in the organization. And the millennials are a tremendous group of people, and for people, I speak vaguely because there may be some 19-year-olds here that I don't know about, but for people of our generation, it's a little, things were differently handled. Here are people who are extremely externally oriented. They're involved in CSR activities. They are doing things outside their work. They have work as a large part of who they are, but it's not the only thing. And therefore, to deal with them is very much more different. It's also more difficult to engage on loyalty, but that's another discussion. So the organization is ready on multiple different areas. From a search perspective, I understand and respect both. In turbulent times, I think we've played the part many times of being more coach than actually a commercial professional body. And that's part of that's part of it. So that's, in fact, a little bit of a learning, and the acceptance and internalization of tough times is the other part. Mm-hmm. I would say that, what doesn't kill you makes you stronger. So having these experiences is important. And I was reading a quote, I think, by Theodore Evans, who said that, a person's mind is like a parachute. It only works when it's open. So you have sometimes challenges and pressures that come onto you, and you respond because there is some pressure to be able to do so.
Yeah, so it's interesting. She's dived straight to the point that matters. Okay, times are tough. He acknowledged, you pretty much acknowledged it. She dived to the point and said, okay, let's talk about the pink slip, which is really when things get as bad as they could. She said companies are, approaching this whole issue, keeping this whole Indian cultural context in mind where people, lives, revolved around work. How do you see this evolving? And another interesting point that came up there was about how you talk about skilling when times are tough. So how do you see this happy mix happening about when you're cutting costs, which of course we will talk about in our next panel, that will be the core of what we will talk about. But how do you look at keeping the morale high, even as you have to cut costs and probably let go of some people and not let it bother,
I think those are the challenges of the time. So key is transparency. I think you need to begin with transparency, talk about what is really going on. Straight talk is really critical, right? Being able to say what you do and do what you say, which I said earlier, is very, very critical so that people don't have to second guess you. The second is, companies grow because they are relevant to their clients. So you need to create an avenue for employees to be relevant to the company. And that is where all the investment on reskilling people for the new requirements for the client is very, very critical. And so making that investment, making the time available for them to look at what is coming and how we can provide interventions for them to develop those skills so that they can continue to be relevant is very, very critical. The third is the aspect of communication, and I think we have talked about the multi-generation workforce that we have. And it is important for us to recognize the needs of these different generations in terms of communication. While the millennials would want, are very comfortable first starting their communication by writing to the chairman and then down, people of our generation would want somebody to stand up there and say what is going on. Right? So it's a completely different kind of approach, and being able to create those communication channels, whether it's a blog, whether it's what we call as the Infi TV or an Infi radio, or whether it is the town halls that you traditionally did, creating these multiple channels that are appropriate to the audience that you're dealing with, being transparent, and then creating a culture that recognizes performance. Culture that celebrates performance, that culture that shows that if you perform well, you have an opportunity to grow, in as much as if you're not doing well and if the company is not doing well, you will be at the other end of the stick. It's important to demonstrate. So walking the talk, transparency and recognition of performance are critical as well.
Just jump into, to what Tam
I,
said.
I do want that. I don't, I do want you to ask questions of each other.
In terms of the conversations that happen, I think it's so important that people avoid the water cooler kind of discussions, and there is that level of openness. But in a larger organization, sometimes it's an issue that has happened just a little while ago that one responds to, and one never knows whether it's perfect or not, or your response time, your kind of response is perfect. How is it that one learns from these kind of different kinds of turbulence? Because the kind of turbulence that I was primarily thinking about was economic turbulence, but that's not always the case. One is dealing with issues on reputation, or issues of, happenstance sometimes.
No, and to add to that, what I wanted to ask was that, we have a dominant crowd, IT crowd here. So IT industry is matured, and the kind of gains one saw people making in this industry, or the salaries people drawing, were absolutely the thing that perfect stories were made of. And now that's not happening because the industry is matured, and the kind of growth that happened in salaries is not happening anymore. And when people don't get that, that does tend to affect morale quite a bit, even though things are stable. So that's also a real factor.
So on the aspect of how do you react to a situation, I think it's important to keep your pulse and be aware of what is going on the ground. So having not just the managers come back to you, but also having the connect with what we call the voice of youth. People who are really on the ground, talking to people, talking to friends on what is going on, and being able to create those channels, listening channels, is really what makes the difference in how you go back and address the issue that may be simmering, and that could be simmering simply because they don't have the full information. Right? So being able to stand up and react to that immediately by sharing all of that information is critical to address that issue. On the issue of compensation, I think we live in a world of relative misery. It's not so much about what I get or don't get, but I'm unhappy that you get something else.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right? And that's the part that I think we need to continuously address through, again, transparency and recognition of performance, where people know that when you do what you need to do, you will get what you're worth. And then that's the critical element of both transparency and performance.
Yeah. I'll start with the last point on compensation. I fully agree with Srikandan. One thing I have done in my career last 5 years is people want more compensation and more information on compensation. And more information on compensation cannot be compensated with more compensation. So Yeah, that's very true. I learned that very hard. So people want more information on compensation. Am I get fairly paid in this company? What is your compensation strategy? Um, am I competitively paid in the industry? And all these questions people have. And we need to get in front of people and tell what is our compensation strategy and how it works in the organization, how competitive in the industry. That information helps a lot. But we have seen people come to you that I'm unhappy with the compensation, so we do a midterm correction or we give a retention bonus. And again, that person come after 3 months or 6 months and ask the same question. But when you get in front of people and explain to them the compensation philosophy, strategy, competitiveness, in whatever form you can explain, then it works a lot. So people want transparency and more information. That helps a lot. That investment, a lot of companies started doing that. It works a lot. Then going back into the first one of issues of reskilling, upskilling, communication and everything. I have seen when I was in US 8 years also, we never do an integrated talent supply chain management, which Accenture does. We are trying to learn from them. Manoj can give more insight into that. Left hand lay off people and right hand go and hire the same skill set or 80% relevant skill set. So we need to, the talent matters culture is very, very important. We need to really shameful to let a person go in an organization. And we need to see, can I invest in reskilling, upskilling? Can I redeploy? Can I have patience for another 3 months waiting for another assignment for that person rather than go and ask him for a quarterly results? So that kind of an investment, or I'm telling long vision, at least one more quarter vision, if you can have it, it works very well. So look at we started developing an heuristics that if that person cannot be deployed in the same project, can you deploy in some other project? If not, can you reskill him for another 20%, 30%. So we started creating heuristics.
So you're saying that sends out a very powerful message in the community. That you are trying your best.
Exactly. Once you do everything, then you give a pink slip and tell him, look, I tried all my best, then it's not working. Then how do you execute that? I worked in a company where people used to tell that ambassador car waits, and we lifted into and kept in the ambassador car and sent home. That is, you don't do it with the heart. You explain the logic of doing it and do it with heart. That is very, very important. So these two things, if you do it, it works very well. Do all the effort to identify how can you keep that person, then execute with a heart. These are the two things we need to do it. Then last one, you asked one question on if a person is let him on integrity or lack of performance, you need to give that message to the organization. That's part of the straight talk. You not name the person, but why a person is let go on integrity or non-performance. That story has to be told to the people. So that's a great lessons we can learn from that. That's what some of the companies do. I have seen that. It's a very powerful story without disclosing the name.
So do you sort of see a lot happening in terms of how companies are supporting employees with outplacement services, etc.? Do you see that as a growing trend?
Yes, definitely.
And that helps?
Yeah, I think that's helpful, but more before we reach that stage, within the organization, especially in big organizations, there's a lot you can do to help people find alternate jobs within the same organization. And that, I think, is the biggest focus, because that's something that's in organization's control. People feel supported, people want to continue with the organization they've liked or they've worked with for a long period of time. And that is where we go out of our way to provide that kind of a support. And most often than not, if managers are sensitized, if the organization understands what the other part of the organization is going through, they will pitch in and help. So that's something that we do very, very actively.
Yeah, I think to add, I think HR plays a very strong role here. Business, if you ask, and you talked about the integrated talent supply chain. So business would always want somebody who's 100% ready to the job from next day. He or she joins today and becomes billable from tomorrow. I think that's where HR plays a very, very strong role to say skills are something which is developed over a period of time. Even if somebody is 50 to 60% fit, force and have that conversation with the business to say it is in the best interest of the firm and the organization to take somebody who's been with the organization for let's say 3 years, 4 years, 5 years. That's a bigger and better bet to take. I think over a period of time, HR in Accenture has played that business partner, strategic partner role very well with the business. And that is what is, I mean, we go through our, cycles of this business has come down, this business goes up, etc. We make sure that the integrated talent supply chain that he's talking about uses to say these are the secondary skills, these are the primary skills, and hence this is where the people, these are people where they can be deployed. And before, if they can be deployed, there are a couple of sub skills, etc., which is missing. They go for a training solution for 3 to 6 weeks and get deployed. I think that transparency and that support that the organization is caring for you is very, very important. The other thing which we haven't really touched about is, while we talked about saying, we should be listening and we should be looking at the pulse, etc., we are an IT organization. We need to innovate and reinvent ourselves to say, how do we measure consistently? For example, in Accenture, we do something called as sentiment analytics. Now, this is a very simple thing about, a lot of things are being said about the organization by different levels across, a lot of things get written on the external website, internal website. Accenture every 6 months does analytics on something called as sentiment analytics. And we know that these are 5 or 6 sentiments or area that are important to us.
The mood derailers.
Yeah, and that is something that we work upon. So you have to think out of the box. One of the things that we put in place was, during this troubled time, was a program called Hours That Help. It's a very simple program. We saw that some people need more vacation than what is prescribed as per the guidelines of the organization. And if you give more during troubled times, it is, the business sees that as a financial loss. So we actually analyze data to say, there is a 20-25% of your organization which does not utilize all the leave. So why don't we ask your friends to contribute hours to help you, because this is your time of need. It's a simple, engaging factor. The employee loves it. A lot of people have taken this opportunity. They are thankful to their teams because they have contributed X number of hours to make that happen. And it's a very simple thing about listening consistently to your employees and coming up with stuff which is both meaningful for the business. Business does not stop because somebody is doing the job, and the employee is pretty engaged to the organization.
Okay. What's consistent? What's interesting is, when all 4 of my HR friends are talking, they're talking about a listening organization. And I think that really is the heart of it, a listening organization. Manoj, about 2-3 years ago, I had written an article for Vahini, which is your Accenture, women's channel. And I remember it was about being more relevant, at mid-career or senior career. And one of the things that came up, one of the things that I mentioned straight up front was, I said sometimes in our attempt to evaluate the world for us at this point, we forget to go and knock on the doors of our own organization to check what else is out there. When I deal with candidates all the time and they say, I really want to try something different. And it's not surprising. Everybody wants to, sort of excel at something different or stretch a nerve or a mental muscle and do something different. But the organization that supports you in this transition is always your current one, because they respect, they understand your ability. Yeah. And that, I think, is important. So sometimes, even in troubled times, it's time to figure out, so what are the things that you do best, or some things that you would like to add value to? Because now you're looking at the organization as something you're a part of, which is living, breathing, pulsing, and has, you're a part of it. So you have to be relevant to it. You have to make your presence impactful. The company doesn't do well, you don't do well. So there's a whole lot of interplay which comes in. I think people understanding that in troubled times, or being, having a larger glimpse of the organization makes a lot of difference. And I got a lot of inputs from that piece saying, oh, well, thanks. I never really thought I could go into my own organization and ask for something different.
So that's a great set of thoughts, but the whole point of it is for this is a knowledge forum, and there are people who are absolutely eager to ask questions. So I would like the audience to, come up, raise your hands if you have any question, and try and be, if you think your question you want to ask a specific person in the panel, then feel free to address.
Hello. I'm Major Shaibu Padmanabhan. I'm heading HR for IFB Automotive. The question I would like to ask is to Mr. Srikandan Murthy. See, we are speaking about the neutralizing negativity. So recently we have seen lots of senior people exiting from Infosys. And see, one of my relative who is just joined from the campus also was telling, see, I am worried when my job is going to get because so many restructuring is happening. So within the organization, how are you actually stopping this sort of negativity coming? Because it will lead to attrition. So is there any special steps which you have taken, or it is just as a part of routine communication you are covering it?
So there's several steps. One is, of course, at the end of the day, it has to be about communication because people need to understand what is going on in the organization. But it is also about communication at various levels. So at the induction, you do something, but enabling managers to understand what is happening in the organization so that their conversation with their teammates, because who you believe is your manager. The moment the manager says, I don't know, you give up. Right? That's when you lose the connect. So it's very, very important, and that's what we continuously do, to engage with the managers first for them to understand what is happening in the organization so that when they have the conversation with any employee, that conviction with which they answer the question, the conviction with which they can explain what is happening makes the difference. So it is communication, but communication at various levels, at various channels, but at the end of the day, enabled managers are the ones that can make the difference.
Yeah, anyone else?
Good evening. My question is to Mr. Srikanth. I'm Aradhya. I work for a venture capital firm. It's good that, and it's very interesting that you said about reskilling and upskilling. I want to know, in the organization now, every management expects every individual to work at 10x because the organization aims at getting into 10x. With this performance levels, when you're spending time on reskilling and upskilling, doesn't it be a waste of time for an individual if he doesn't perform? And then what is, if you're doing that and giving a time, is there a time frame for that? If yes, what is the ideal time? If not, will that doesn't spread a negativity with other performers?
Yeah. It's a good question. A lot of my colleagues are there from IT, especially service industry. So for every assignment with a customer or every assignment with a project, he comes with the right mix of skill set. So we call it as from the pyramid perspective, what should be the structure, the skill mix perspective in terms of proficiency or the rookie ratio, or from the semi-skilled, whatever we call it, we come up with that. So that's a balancing act we need to do it for engagement of a assignment to a client or a project. So that balancing act in the interest of the organization and while considering the learning time or the skill upgradation time an employee need to undertake is very, very important. So some of the organizations have reached a state where they have commoditized the upskilling and reskilling or cross-skilling activities. For example, I'll tell you, we have learned some of the areas. For example, if you are moving from Java to .NET or Unix to Linux or COBOL to Java, what it takes to be successful in that kind of a cross-skilling, and how many days of classroom training, how many days of shadow programming, how many days of e-learning we need to go through it, and what kind of profile will be successful. So there will be a pre-cross-skilling test that person need to do it, and there is a screening done, then only we'll allow that person to go through this cross-skilling and upskilling and upskilling or multi-skilling. So there are a lot of, it is run like a factory today, the cross-skilling and upskilling industry within the organization. So the probability of success is enlarged, as well as the mix of the engagement in our project is determined how much people we require at a different levels of proficiency, learning, or an expert, or a medium kind of a person. So that's what makes successful, and that's what the resource management function is so matured and so professional today. Did I answer it?
Good evening, I'm Ravindranath. My question is general to everybody. Suppose in this recession kind of an environment where we need to let go of poor performance people, which would affect morale of the other employees, and by which even the talented ones are going to, put their papers and things like that. In this scenario, how we are going to get the negativity off and make it into a positive transition?
I will just slightly, at a higher level to respond to your point. One is the here and now communication that everybody spoke about, being transparent, communicating with people. But one of the things that I have found useful is connecting people to something which is larger than day to day. People who stay back in the organization. So, for example, our organization, GE Healthcare, has a very strong vision, which is at work for a healthier India. And what we try and do is bring people back to that vision, keeping in mind that what we do on a day-to-day basis, despite all that's happening around us, is connected to helping someone become success, be safe, become better. And how do we, our machines, how do we help people, on a day-to-day basis to do that? So bringing that back in the organization as a focus helps people to take a step back and realize that, it's not just about, what's happening to my colleague or a bad quarter or a bad result or not having enough compensation, but there's a larger purpose to it. So that's something that I would say from a communications perspective, from how managers are trained to treat their employees, it's a very important piece to bring out.
And I added to what he has mentioned. GE has pioneered this 10, 70 and 20 distribution, top 20, middle 70 and bottom 10. So when I was working in GE, one of the things which from that days we started following is, it is not the bottom 10 firing. So that's a bad message you are giving to the organization. We call it as bottom 10 resolution. So how do you resolve it? That message should go into the organization. You resolve in 3 ways. One is you give a chance to perform by putting in a performance improvement plan. Some percentage of people, you move them into different role. Some percent of the people, you don't give them a chance because you already given in the performance cycle early chance. So you need to really give that process visibility and clarity and communication to the people. So when a person has been communicated at the end of the PIP or end of the behavioral improvement plan or job rotation or whatever it may be, you have done the fairness to him. So the fairness is perceived fairness is very important. You said, I have done my job, but that perception by the individual who is going out and his colleagues is very, very important. So that perception cannot be achieved overnight. It's a part of the culture. How do you do that culture is very, very important.
So thanks. It was a great session, and we will have to close it there. And if maybe you have some questions, you could probably get them as they are, later, and have your questions answered. So it was great having all of you. Thank you so much.